If everybody would have out their teacher rubric and open it up to the second page, Domain 1, Planning and Preparation. The subcomponent is setting instructional goals. What I'd like every table to do is anchor yourself to a 3. So look at what all the 3s are for proficiency when it comes to setting instructional goals. And I just want you to take 3 minutes to talk to the people at your table about one of these bullet points you think you're doing really well, and one of these bullet points you think you'd like to go back to your campus and reevaluate. So if you look on the second page, component 1C, setting instructional outcomes, the proficiency first bullet says outcomes represent high expectations and rigor. Remember that you're looking at this with the lens of yourselves as the school leaders, talking about your teachers. So I would interpret that to mean my teachers' outcomes represent high expectations and rigors. The second one, my teacher outcomes are related to big ideas of the discipline. Third one, outcomes are written in terms of which students will learn rather than what they do. And outcomes represent a range of outcomes: factual, conceptual, understanding, reasoning, social, management, communication. And outcomes are suitable to groups of students in the class, differentiated where needed. So have a quick conversation at your table about one of those you think you're doing really well, and one of them that you think you'd like to reevaluate back at your school for this upcoming school year. And we're going to share out in just a minute. All right, we're going to come back together. That was just a quick little talk. I'm curious to see if I have a brave soul who would be willing to finish this statement for me. So when I think about the teachers in my school, when it comes to the teachers in my school setting instructional outcomes and looking at this rubric, when I go back to my school, I'd like to reconsider or reevaluate and finish that sentence.
Differentiation.
Differentiation? That's a common one, huh? Yeah, and that's probably the hardest thing to put your finger on, because it's so hard to identify what that should look like, because it looks different in almost every situation, right? When it comes to setting their instructional outcomes, let's follow this path just for a minute. If that's an area of focus for us, before we even go in the classroom, what could we use as an indicator to see if our teachers are differentiating? I always go back to this. This was many moons ago in college. I worked at the Gap in the mall, and you'd walk up to a customer and say, "Can I help you with anything?" And then the customer could say yes or no to that question, right? And then I was left with nothing else to engage them in discussion. So you really have to learn as the teacher how to ask how and why questions, so that your students begin to ask how and why questions to each other. Because when you ask how can I help you, it forces somebody into a response, right? Outside of yes and no. So I always go back to that example to remember that we've got to rely heavily on how and why questions and move away from yes, no, or single answer responses. If we look at, we're going to skip over and go to, you know what, we're not. We're going to go to, yeah, we are. Engaging students in learning, which is this column. And it says for engagement in learning, we want to see most students are intellectually engaged in the lesson. The learning tasks have multiple correct responses or approaches, or they demand higher order thinking. So we want to see that synergy of information in the classroom. The students have some choice in how they complete their learning tasks. There's a mix of different types of groups suitable to the lesson objective. So that goes back to the differentiation that we saw earlier, tying that in. And materials and resources support their learning goals and require intellectual engagement as appropriate. The pacing of the lesson provides students the time they need to be intellectually engaged. So my question to this column is this. Reflecting upon the rubric, in thinking about the walkthroughs that you've done in your own schools, which area from the proficiency level 3 would you think that your students do, your teachers are really, really good at engaging your students in? Or what's an area of growth that you'd like to focus on in the upcoming school year when it comes to engagement?
Something having a choice on something that they're struggling with is the students having a choice of how they complete the learning task. Most of the choices is one-dimensional. All the students are turning in the same work at
Yep.
the end of the lesson.
I think that that's a great area because when it says students have some choice in how they complete the learning task, there is only one way to say it, and it's like this. There is a rigidness that we have as teachers that is really a barrier between us moving to the next level with the expectations from the new standards. And it's I think, a lot of times an internal conflict that we have because of control and the need to remain in control. And I see it related to the level of questioning that we use and also allowing kids multiple ways to express the same outcome. I'll give you the example of questioning. If I ask a how or why question, I have to be prepared in order to answer that question in a meaningful way. And that can be a scary place, right? If you ask a how or why question, sometimes we don't get the response that we think is tailored and directly meant to answer the question. And so there's a little bit more engagement that goes on there with the students. And what happens is the student has to grapple with the information. And so now the teacher's having to grapple with the information in their planning in order to be able to address those variations that you might get in a response. Allowing students to as it says here, having choice in how they complete the learning task means that I also have to be less rigid in the expectations for how the work is done, but be tight on what is, meeting the standard, right? So we've heard some of the gurus say, be tight on the what, but be loose on the how. And I think that that's an important lesson to learn when it comes to this with engagement. As long as they're meeting the standard or the objective that works towards the standard, you can be loose on how they get there.